much. All right, we're going to have some fun. Steve gave a good presentation last week. I've been told I have to stand here, which, as you all know, is a bad thing for me. All right. Steve started us off talking about the politics, and I'm going to pick up, talk about the economics, but I do want, in light of one or two of the questions that came up, to give us a little bit of a preview. So I want to get back to a point he made. He said that all politics is about power. I would agree with that. As a good student of Machiavelli, that's in my heart. So I just want to set some ground rules and talk about some basic stuff that's got nothing to do, but you'll realize why it has at the end. As a society, we fixed the economic question, by which I mean we now provide lots of prosperity for ourselves. We don't get into that Malthusian up and down, one step forward, one step back. We are now steadily growing. That's why we obsess over economic growth each year. I remind you that started in 1870. That real pickup started in 1870. It did not start in the Enlightenment or the Industrial Revolution or any of those things. That rapid period of growth started in 1870, which is why you will find a lot of economic historians referring to the 20th century as starting in 1870. It's just a convenient way of clumping it all together, which means that we've only had 150 years to practice some of these policies and ideas, and that in the history of the nation is no time at all. What we haven't done is to solve the social question, which is who gets that to share in that prosperity, and that's, in a nutshell, what we're talking about tonight. There's been a radical change in who gets to share, who gets what, and who runs who gets what. There's a third point I want to make, because we all fall into this trap. We are all used, in this 150 so years of rapid growth, to saying that technology automatically increases the wealth of the average person. It does not. There's a blockage. This is the blockage. The power of our elite determines who gets what. It's not automatic. Okay, so keep that in your mind, because that's another theme for this evening. That's always been true. A good example I was given was the 1300s, agricultural societies around Europe. Any improvement in agriculture should have benefited everybody. The standard of living should have gone up. It didn't. Why? Because despite a series of things like better water wheels, better windmills, better thing, that surplus that was created was scarfed up, in that instance, by the Catholic Church, who set about building a whole bunch of really, really fancy churches and cathedrals, which we all look at as great cultural artifacts, which the people at the time probably thought, tear them down and give me the money, please. So it was there's always a tension between the way in which the surplus is created and who gets to use it. That, if I was to summarize this evening's conversation, that's our conversation. So only after power is changed does the distribution change. The New Deal was a shift towards the middle class. The neoliberal area, which is what we're talking about, was designed, put in place, the policies were decided upon to undo the New Deal, which is kind of interesting because, by implication, that meant attacking the middle class, which is not something we like to talk about too much, right? It's not a good subject to talk about. So to win elections, you have to get the middle class to vote for you, hence the liberal use of the word liberty. So I just wanted to put that in front of you, because that's my summary where Steve kind of left us. If you remember, he said it's a battle between the haves and the have-nots. We're now getting into the guts of the economic policies, the fight between the haves and the have-nots. Okay. This is the way I'm going to do it. I want to talk about who, why, where. Where did these ideas come from? Good context. That's going to take me a while. This is a long presentation, guys. Get used to it. Then we get to the years. I call it all illusion because the poor middle class is getting suckered in along the way here. That's why I call it illusion. Policies and consequences. You know a lot of that stuff because we lived through it, right? So I don't have to get too deeply into that. You already know the answers there. Then I want to talk at the end a little bit about what's happening now. I've got some interesting quotes from some interesting politicians, and I'm going to challenge you to figure out who said what. Because it is not clear. I really think we are in a new world. And both of our political parties are walking away from this, what we're going to be talking about, which is interesting to me because I try to figure out where they're going. I'm not sure they know where they're going, but I think it's a new world, so we ought to get used to it. All right. One of the things that annoys me about the word neoliberalism is that people like Martin Wolf insist on putting it in quote marks, like it's not a thing. It's like, okay, that's an epithet that lefty people like Peter throw around just to criticize Ronald Reagan. That is absolutely not true. It's a word they chose to describe themselves, okay? So when we call them neoliberals, we're doing them the honor of referring to them the way they referred to themselves, so that you feel free to use the word. It started in a very particular place, at a meeting held in Paris in 1938. This is the Lippmann Colloquium. What is it? It was led by this guy, French intellectual. How many French intellectuals are there? There seem to be thousands. Every Frenchman thinks he's an intellectual, I think. But anyway, look, this guy figures out that Walter Lippmann is in Paris. Lippmann's just written this interesting book called The Good Society. If you haven't read it, please read it. It's a good book. He loved this book, said, oh, I understand you're in Paris, and I understand it's the French edition. Great, why don't we have a little meeting to have a discussion about your book? Great book. I'll get some of my best buddies together, we'll talk about your book. And that's how this thing came into being. The attendees were Raymond Aron, who's a big French sociologist you know about, Hayek, whose picture I just put there, von Mises, who's another one of the Austrian emigre economists that have had a huge influence on the last 50 years. Polanyi, Susan, this is Michael Polanyi, not Carl Polanyi. This is Carl Polanyi's brother, okay? And then Rupker, and I put Rupker on the list because he played a big role after World War II in creating West German economic policy, okay? And in fact, some people argue that the origins of the idea of the economic union came from this meeting. Okay, so this is a big deal meeting. The background was the chaos in Europe. It was heavily European. There were only 20, 25 people there and only one American, okay? The objective of Lippmann's book was to rescue liberalism. Now please, I'm now using the word liberalism in the European sense of that word, i.e. free trade, right? Small state, free markets is the classic, what would be called, 1800s liberalism. If you were walking around the streets of London, you would recognize this. Not the way that we use the word necessarily in this country. But the key is to rescue liberal ideas from the chaos of laissez-faire. Laissez-faire, these guys are all saying, blew up in our faces in the Great Depression. It brought a tremendous amount of criticism of capitalism. Capitalism's dead on its knees, but we don't like totalitarianism and we don't like socialism. We've got to refurbish liberalism. In their meetings, it was about 3 days, one of the last sessions, they chose the word neoliberalism to describe a priority of the price mechanism, free enterprise. It's based heavily on a system of competition. Please note that to make liberalism work, you need ferocious competition. Okay? And I mean ferocious. No profits for capitalists. People always get that wrong. It's like in a proper free market system, capitalists don't make profits. They can get a return on their investment. But if you make profits, something's not right. Okay? So again, we all need to understand these kinds of things. And, nota bene, a strong state to enforce all this. These were the components coming out of the French meeting. At the end of it, they divided into two groups, roughly. This is my interpretation. I've done you the courtesy of actually reading the minutes of these damn meetings, so it's interesting to see the conversations between. Hayek did not like some of the things that Lippmann liked. In Lippmann's book, he said one of the ways we rescue liberalism is to have strong safety nets, so that if people lose from capitalism, they don't fall apart. Hayek, being the true free market guy he is, don't need that. The market will take care of it. So there was a schism developing. They said, okay, we'll meet next year. Obviously 1939, and they're not going to go and meet in Paris in 1939. One thing leads to another. The next meeting takes place, and it's organized by Hayek. Now notice that the trajectory is probably changing. We're leaving the Lippmannites a little bit to one side here. We're now into the Mount Perelin Society. He gets money from the Volcker Fund, and they create a meeting in Switzerland, in Mount Perelin, to put together, have the same kind of discussion. This time, there's the background, though, has changed, because obviously World War II has changed the attitude. The background now is the New Deal. The Volcker Fund is adamantly opposed to the New Deal. They're trying to put together ideas to undo the New Deal. This seems to be a good place to do it. I missed out. In the interim, during World War II, Hayek had been having a lot of conversations. He wanted to move from the London School of Economics to the United States. Nobody would really have him. The Volcker Fund was trying to sponsor him to come across to write an American edition of his book, which I'm sure you've all read, The Road to Serfdom. If you haven't, you have to. It's one of those books that everyone should have read if you're going to have this discussion, right? That book went over like gangbusters. Nobody thought it was going to sell at all. He had a really hard time getting it published, but when it was published, it just sold out. The Volcker Fund guys want to bring him over to the United States and publish an American version so that they're willing to pay for it, have it published, distribute it, to attack the New Deal. So you can see we're moving from an original conversation about, let's say, liberalism to, where we want to have a specific kind of liberalism, all right? They didn't talk about that kind of stuff. They took out a lot of the Lippmann stuff. And it's the same list. Strong government to protect property rights. Strong government is really, really important to these guys. It comes across as a theme all the way through. Market principles. We now start talking about things like economic efficiency, which is a big moral change in the way we think about the world. Individual agency. We're going to liberate. Notice now the marketing is coming in. We're going to liberate you from the government. This is how we have to position this. The government's the enemy, don't forget. Okay? So they start talking about liberating people, setting them free so that they are individual economic agents, just like we read in the textbook. This is another novelty in this meeting that wasn't really discussed in the Paris meeting. Globalization. True liberalism is an international thing. It really doesn't like sticking at national borders. We want capital to be free, to move anywhere in the world, to find the returns that it can, and we believe that that will improve the world for everybody, right? Free market. They also, parenthetically, are fully in favor of free movement of labor. So immigration is a big deal to these guys too, but I've shunted that to one side for the want of time. Okay, let me just, notable names, lots and lots of people associated. The Mount Perelin Society still exists, by the way. Okay, it's still a thing. It's a very exclusive club. It's a bunch of very famous people. Some very interesting names. Michael, Ruth Richardson, member of the thing. Arthur Burns from the Federal Reserve Board. Howe was the Chancellor of the Exchequer in England. And Erhard helped establish West Germany after World War II. So this is an influential group of folks. Of the 76 economic advisors that I could count during the Reagan 8 years, 22 were members of this society, heavy influence. Journalists, Lippmann was a member. You can see the news, the media. Reader's Digest, the New York, Hazlitt wrote a very famous book, Economics in One Lesson. Very, very free market kind of guy. Very influential at the New York Times. Washington Post, Life magazine. You can see that this group of people were able to get their ideas into the media and start influencing the conversation. It's the purpose of this process. Don't forget, we're going after the New Deal, and if you're going after the New Deal, you need a platform, you need a framework, you need to start persuading people that it's a bad thing. Other academics, you probably don't care about this, and I put it entirely gratuitously. I got stuck in the elevator with Lionel Robbins. That's why I put him there, okay? I was this big, and he's huge. It was huge. Think tanks, the American Enterprise Institute, Cato, Hoover, Mercatus, not sure you've heard of Mercatus. They're very proud of themselves. They're the most influential, they call themselves the most influential think tank nobody's ever heard of. It's 100% funded by the Koch family, and it's at George Mason, okay? It started its life at Rutgers, interestingly, but the Kochs basically said, we don't want you in a state university, we want you under our control, go to George Mason and we'll write a big check, okay? So you can see that we've moved from having an interesting conversation in Paris about some interesting ideas, and we're building now a movement. And there's a lot of money flooding into this movement. Then we get to phase 3, which I call the radical American part. I don't think anybody else calls it, but this is just my way of looking at it. Chicago, right? This is my head explodes. And I felt bad for these guys. These are Jacob Viner, Henry Simons, and Frank Knight. These are well-known heavyweight economists. Big deal people, Frank Knight in particular, wonderful, wonderful economist. They get shunted out. Poor Henry Simons actually gets so distraught he commits suicide. This is a terrible story. But they get shunted aside because Hayek arrives, funded by the Volcker Fund, to write his book, and he starts assembling a team. He hires George Stigler. These may not be names you know, but you should know. George Stigler is a big deal. He's funded by the Walgreen family to come and investigate government intrusion into markets. Literally that, read the correspondence, we need you to go there and tell us why government is wrong. Right? This is really good academic stuff, right? I mean, it's like we're not looking at the world as it is, we're trying to create a program. Aaron Director, funded by the Volcker Fund to run something called the Free Markets Project. Aaron Director is one of our villains of the piece. He's an economist, but he actually works in the law department. And one of his key students is Robert Bloch. So there's connections now, I'm hoping, to names that you remember and the struggles that you can recall from the 70s and 80s. Friedman is hired. He was at the University of Minnesota before this. The department becomes a center. Very important point, libertarian, not democratic. If you read what these people talk about democracy, you would be kind of weird. It's a little scary. Stigler, for instance, writes frequently about you can't trust the public to know sophisticated problems in economics, so we should push them to one side and have elite people doing that kind of stuff. And the joke around Chicago became that Stigler thinks the world consists of Stigler and 115 million morons. And that's the way that he thought, they're trying to give you insight into the way these guys were. They're a very, very talented, very clever group of people. Let's not kid ourselves. But they had a point of view, a very strong point of view. Antitrust law was changed because Robert Bork and Aaron Director helped change it. Social theory, I don't know if you know any of these names. Gary Becker changed it. He's the guy that suddenly said that economics is so smart, we can get rid of sociology, we can get rid of all those other things, we'll just do economics. So when we're discussing, let's say, crime, we're going to use economic modeling. We're not going to talk to sociologists anymore. They don't know anything. Finance, Eugene Farmer is the efficient markets hypothesis person. His ideas blew up. Too bad for him in the financial crash of 2009. All right, so that's this gang, the Chicago School. There is another gang, Virginia, which you probably know less about. The key players are Buchanan and Tulloch. Buchanan is a student of Stigler. That's the connection, okay? They developed something called public choice theory, which is really, really interesting. You should know a little bit about public choice theory, because what they do is they say don't forget, they're using economic theory to explain everything. There's only one theory here in this world now. It's just economic theory, and it's free market economic theory, okay? It's not Keynesian stuff. That's silly, all right? We're talking about free market stuff. They look at government employees as if they are economic agents, buying and selling influence. They're working for themselves. They are not working in the public interest. There is no such thing as the public interest, okay? Get that out of your minds. There is no such thing as the public. You can see where this program is going. It's fun. I'm having fun. You're having fun. I can see the energy. This is good. So it replaces public interest with the profit motive. Now we've got civil servants running around, but they're not civil servants doing good work. They're not like Steve going into, a role in government saying, I'm trying to do something useful in the world. No, 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 no. They're buying and selling influence. And that's where we get the idea, directly from this, we get the idea of government capture and special interests rent-seeking and buying the elite. It's an interesting theory, fantastically well-researched. These are really, as I said, I think Buchanan won a Nobel Prize for this. Poor old Tulloch didn't. I always wonder why, but Buchanan won it. So this is really, really good stuff. So let me that's my run through how neoliberalism came to be, but I want to summarize it. We started up with what I call the pragmatic phase. They're trying to solve a problem. We're trying to refurbish liberalism, right? And it's a reaction to World War I and the Great Depression. This is all decent kind of stuff. It's non-ideological. It's what I would call positive science. They're actually trying to do science. The goal is to modernize liberalism. And I think that were Adam Smith to be alive, he would say, I get exactly what you're talking about. Right? You're anti-big corporate, just like I am, because we don't want monopolies. Don't forget what Adam Smith said. You can't trust a businessman as far as you can kick him. I'm paraphrasing. He didn't actually say that. Right? But that's the gist of what he said. These guys are on board with that. I think Smith said they will conspire against the consumer, or conspire against the public. Then we kind of move on, because Hayek's getting more involved. We get this transition, what I call the transition to utopia phase. Transatlantic. Now we've got a lot of Americans involved. The European part is shunted a little bit to one side. It's ideology. It's quasi-science. We're not really interested too much in discovering things. We're trying to articulate that program I was talking about. We're trying to create a liberal version of utopia to contrast with those silly Marxists over there in the Soviet Union. And you may laugh at me, but Hayek wrote a long paper saying exactly that. We have to create a liberal utopia to attract the hearts and minds of people who may otherwise be interested in the Marxist one. So that you can see the way this is going. Modified Smith. Yeah, Smith would write maybe bits of that. Then we get to the American academic phase and we go all in. This is not about anything. This is a reaction to the Cold War. We can't use words like social because that sounds like Marxist. This sounds like the Soviet Union, and we Americans are fighting the Soviet Union, so we don't use words like social, okay? Purely ideological. We're not worried about science at this point. We're going to substitute, as I said, economics for politics, and we're going to eliminate society. All the Brits will know that. That's one of Thatcher's famous sayings. There's no such thing as society. Actually, she said, society, comma, there's no such thing. Point. If you eliminate society, you eliminate citizenship. I'm going to get to that. Think about that. Ponder that. It's rhetorical, Smith, at this point. These guys wheel Smith out every so often because we want to connect back with, like the invisible hand and all of that kind of stuff and make ourselves like we're in the great tradition of liberal economics. But we don't want to attack monopolies so much because Bork has already redefined antitrust law, the way monopoly is a good thing, not a bad thing. So we've changed and twisted. Neoliberalism has gone through 3 distinct phases. This is the phase that is now operating in the backs of people's minds in the 1960s, 70s, right? So here we go. Abolish citizenship. We got a competitive, everything's competitive. Everything's competitive. You've got to get inside these people's heads. The market sorts everything out for us. We don't need anyone to have those silly moral decisions because they're soft and argumentative. The market decides, and what the market decides is right. By definition. By definition. Global, because we don't want those silly, Germans slapping tariffs on and stopping my capital to arrive. We need to be able to move our capital around the world. Legal, not administrative. We don't want technocrats telling us how to do this. Thank you very much. Right? No administrative. That's where the deep state concept comes from. Libertarian, not democratic, because we want to, two things. We want to get rid of collective action, because that sounds vaguely communist, right? Anything collective. The other thing is we don't like democracy. We don't like people interfering in our elite decisions about what's good and wrong, good, bad in the economy. And of course there's this, okay? Free markets, free markets, free markets. And as a consequence of that, there's a price on everything, including your grandmother. Okay, there's a price on everything. I'll get to that in a minute, right? Everything is for sale. I dug this it kind of summarizes. Stedman Jones wrote a very good book talking about this whole period. And this is his way of describing what I've just tried to summarize for you. We're moving away from the idea that government has any moral power. Governments don't have moral power. Last week somebody asked, there was a question about morality, moral. We don't have moral anymore. Well, of course we don't. We've abolished it. We're believers in the market now. Market is our moral. That's our moral compass, all right? And the other part of this is deliverer of freedom. These guys truly, honestly believe that it's the market that protects your freedom, not the laws of the land, not the Constitution, none of that stuff. It's the free market that will protect your freedom. It's an interesting philosophy. It's a very sound philosophy if you look at it as a series of part of logic. It collapses when you try to put it in place, just like Marxism collapses in place, because people have power. It runs into politics. When people have power, the beauty of this wonderful series of ideas, it's a wonderful series of ideas, collapses. So, okay. Business, though. I've tinted throughout business, business, business. What we've got to remember, just mentioned power, business didn't like what was going on in the New Deal. They wanted to change the New Deal. But they didn't have kind of a moral compass. They didn't have an idea. This was their idea. You saw they started funding it. University of Chicago's new economics department, created specifically by private money for this purpose. Same at George Mason, same at Virginia. They were flooding money in. These guys were flooding money into think tanks and goodness knows what else to create the atmosphere for change. Then they sat back and waited for the change. This is I don't know, I know Steve mentioned this last week, which is why I put it in here. These are the first two lines from this. No thoughtful person can question the economic under broad attack. He wrote that in 1971. And it became the manifesto for the Chamber of Commerce, for the Business Roundtable. These guys started having conversations. What are you doing? Who are you giving money? The Federalist Society emerged all sorts of stuff come from the conversations spurred by this memorandum. If you haven't read it, read it. It's a fun document, not that long. You can find it online. Business. I mentioned Reagan. This is how Reagan gets into the scene. General Electric pays him to go on the road. Business money, putting him out there, walking around the country, doing his various, in his wonderful way, those talks that he used to do, and warning people about the socialism inherent in the New Deal, and why Social Security. That was always his favorite. Why Social Security is undermining the moral fiber of America, because it's meaning that people don't save. And it's an aspect of our program that people have to save. It's an honest thing to do. I've mentioned that, and I've mentioned that, and I put power matters, because this is ultimately a story about a shift in power. That's what this is about. All of that history I just gave you was designed to create a set of ideas to undo the prior set of ideas which were underneath the New Deal. Okay? That's why this whole thing exists. One guy noticed, long quote, this is Doug Fraser, the president of the UAW, and just read the top. I believe leaders of the business community, with a few exceptions, have chosen to wage a one-sided class war, right? Against working people, blah, 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 blah. And he notes at the end that you're going to toss out, essentially he's saying, I know what your goal is, to toss out the New Deal and the social contract that he had. Yeah, this is a paragraph from his resignation letter. He was on a business union group where they used to meet regularly to collaborate, to talk about issues, wages, and so on. And those meetings had got so fraught, he just threw his hands up and said, I'm out of here. Especially after in the years after the Powell Memorandum. This is part of his resignation letter. So this is not just me making this stuff up. It's people at the time knew what was going on. Okay? You did. Maybe you were all there. I'm looking around the room. You guys were there. Okay. This is where we can get a little feisty. So here are the main policies. Tax reduction. You all remember this. What's the purpose? Stop, impede redistribution of wealth? Yes, we've got to stop that idea that somehow money's available to move around in the economy. Redistribution is a bad thing. So, one way of stopping it, lower taxes, they have no money to redistribute. Defund government social programs, privilege capital over work. Most people in this country do not realize that the tax code is biased against people who work. It is biased in favor of people who have capital income. Bigly, as someone would say. All right? That is not an accident either. Okay? Deregulation. Accelerate expansion of banking. The bankers were all in on deregulation because they were really frustrated their industry had become really boring. Michael, you can appreciate that. I can appreciate it. I spent a lot of my very bad and squandered youth writing position papers. I don't know if you remember Paul O'Neill. Does anyone remember who Paul O'Neill was? I used to write position papers for Paul O'Neill. He was on our board of directors before he became Treasury Secretary. And he would then run down to Washington and lobby for bank deregulation. So I have my nasty little fingers in this one. That's my personal contribution to the collapse of the economy. We wanted to get donations, because if we're going to fund this whole program, we actually need a source of money. We need to get money into politics. So we need to find a way of doing that as part of the program. And we need to be able to permit industry concentration. Prior to Aaron Director, remember these names, and Bork, antitrust law had been built around the idea that industry concentration. So if there are 5 companies with a large concentration, right, you would break it up and say, no, you can't merge. No more concentration. That got swept out by the Chicago folks and substituted, oh, we don't mind monopoly as long as prices go down for consumers. Right? We completely got, which is why a lot of what you think may be an obvious antitrust case never gets to court because we've changed the rules. We've changed the rules of one, and that's, again, part of the process. And you'll notice who it benefits. I'm not naming names. Globalization. Free capital, I mentioned that a couple of times. Encourage outsourcing, offshoring. This was an obvious attraction to any large corporation looking to expand its footprint and find good places for more profits. Expose wage earners. These lazy American workers actually want benefits and stuff. So we'll go and make our stuff where people don't want benefits and stuff. And that saves us money and gets us money to the right people. Reduce government involvement. Privatize in the UK, Michael, but that's not so important here. But we certainly want to restrict government investment. Undermine Reagan. I've mentioned this. Oh, and this last one. This is one of my favorites. We shift the risk. Because don't forget, we've liberated you. You're now a free agent. Go swim with the sharks. Good for you. I'm assuming you know how to do that. I'm assuming you know how to do that. Okay? And if the AT&T squelches on you, tough. You're an individual. They're individuals. Fight it out. Okay? That's up to you. We threw our folks into a pool where, and ultimately, I've got another slide in a minute, where you get things like the gig economy, which is the ultimate expression of setting people free. I mean, you know this stuff. I love the names of these. Economic Recovery Act of 18. They always have these long names. These I don't know. Maybe they're insecure in what they're trying to do, and they try to come up with a good name. Free trade, you were all there for that. International development, Washington Consensus. Once you've got a good idea, you may as well smash it around the world, right? I mean, so that's what we were doing. I love this last one. I put it on there especially as a tribute to Ukraine. Post USSR Russia, they go and they try, as the Soviet Union collapses, people arrive in plane loads to teach them how to be free market people. They screw it up, and what happens? Putin. That's what happens. So there you go. There are consequences to some of this that I don't think even they thought about. Chile is an interesting one. There's a great book called The Chile Boys, which tracks the history of people like Friedman and Hayek going down to Chile and introducing this kind of... It was quite successful for a while. I give them credit. Then the bottom fell out when everyone realized how unequal society had gotten. And now they've had civil unrest and all sorts of things in recent years. You probably lived through a lot of this. I don't want to... Shareholder value is the one that is near and dear to my heart. I've talked about that a lot before. This is the risk shift. You don't need a defined benefits plan. You need a defined contribution plan. It's a stress for that corporation to come up with that. You're a good investor. Well, you go and do it yourself. You all know how to do that. You're clever people. You know how to do that. Which is why the 401k plan, my poor wife spent 20 years in the retirement business, it's a disaster. We've got a whole swathe of people coming to retirement totally inadequately prepared, but at least they're free, which is a good thing. I'm sure they appreciate it. Independent money, I put this in, Phil's not here. I put this in because Phil Goldsmith asked about the Fed last week. 2%, who knows? 3%, who knows? It could, you could choose a number. 2% is low. I think 3 or 4 would have been a better number to choose, and you could have stuck to it, and everybody would have been perfectly happy. Independent, how independent is the Federal Reserve Board when its governors are appointed by the Senate? I mean, come on, who are we kidding here? Deregulation, I think, as we've mentioned already. Okay, now, little game, I thought, you need talking up. I went back to 76 through 2000, which was the period of higher deregulation, and I came up with all the bits of deregulation that I thought were important and listed them. You can tell, I'm giving you a hint because they're color-coded, right? Okay, 2 there. A whole bunch here. Oh my goodness. The second one down is an interesting one because that's an executive order. What it says is, Mr. President says, that any government, federal government department who's coming up with a program or wants to advocate a program or run or manage a program doesn't do it now because it's the right thing to do. You have to do it according to a cost-benefit analysis. Right? Our government is now going to be efficient. We don't do things that are inefficient. Okay? It's an executive order. And it changes, if you think about that, that's a profound change in the governance. We're not doing it because it's the right thing. We're doing it because it's the cost-benefit folks. We're going to hire an army of accountants and economists and all those kinds of people and no numbers, and they're going to run the government for us. Okay? This is kind of a legacy of the McNamara influence on Kennedy during the Vietnam War. Everyone got obsessed with people with PhDs in mathematics and stuff. They started cluttering up the government. They had nothing to do, so we gave them something to do. That's why this exists. Next one. I love the first one here, against the Depository Institution Act. That's the deregulation of the savings and loans. It took approximately 4 years for that industry to destroy itself after it was deregulated. Well done, boys. I like that. That's very clever. It should have taught us a lesson, but unfortunately it didn't, because in 1999 we deregulated the commercial banking industry, and that they actually took longer. They're obviously dullards by comparison. It took them about 6 or 7 years to blow up their industry. Deregulating banks is a very, very silly idea. They need to be re-regulated heavily. Okay, you can guess what I did. 2 points to Nixon, 9 to Carter, 6 to Reagan, 7 to Clinton. The neoliberal deregulatory period is a democratic thing. Get used to it, okay? A lot of people in the room thought I was going to criticize the Republicans. No, I'm not. Look at that list, okay? Look at that list. Who did what to whom, okay? All right? My point is that those ideas became so powerful, so pervasive, everybody got on the bus. Both parties. Both, which is why it's hard to get off the bus, because they're confused. Oh my goodness. All right. So that's the deregulatory period. Let's get some charts, because I know you want charts. This is the drop in the top rate of income tax. And I'm using 75 as the starting point for some of this, because that's generally the starting point of the neoliberal era. What was this supposed to do? Boost investment. Boom the economy. So I'll leave it to you when I get to that chart on the economy whether we boomed or not, okay? Just bear that in mind, but I have one to go first. The big blue bar here is how much money, this is 2019. I chose that because it's before the pandemic. Pandemic kind of screwed everything up. $3.1 trillion collected in income tax. That's corporate and personal income tax, okay? Social Security cost is 1.2, the defense budget is 751 million, the Medicare is 740. They're the big programs. The rest is substantial when you add it up, but each program is tiny by comparison. What's that big red bar over there, Peter? What are you hiding from us? That's called tax expenditure. What is that? Loopholes. Stuff that we don't really want to talk about because it's a freebie to somebody. Most of the people in this room benefit from some form of subsidy from the United States government. If you collect any of these and fill out your taxes and you do it properly, you're on the dole in one form or another, okay? We're all there. Don't be ashamed. Seriously, don't be ashamed. I mean, it's like, this is the way we run the country. We give money, especially to well-off people who pay taxes, okay? A lot of money, as it turns out, all right? I did the quick calculation. The top 20% of the population gets 30% of that. So our top 30% are getting a very hefty welfare support. They're really well looked after. I applaud it. Don't forget, GDP is going to boom. Not. It didn't, unfortunately. There's a lot of ups and downs, but as you can see, we're sliding down. It's like a clock slowly winding down. For those of you who want a little more fun, I did the same thing, and I took out the high points. So that the high point, the growth period in the 80s, 4.1. The high point in the 90s into the aughts, 3.3. The high point after thing. This is not an economy that's booming. I think that's self-explanatory. It's slowing down. We may want to understand why, but at the moment we're using the policies that got us here, so we're not probably going to get out too fast. This is investment. Don't forget all those high taxes going to rich people is going to get investment and invest. Do you see the trend? I don't see the trend. I would say that policy probably didn't work. Okay? This is infrastructure spending. Same thing. We don't want the government to get involved in too much spending. And the interesting thing about government expenditure is it's not like a company. You don't have an income statement or a balance sheet. Infrastructure spending would be on a balance sheet, not an income statement. So we wouldn't be showing it as a deficit. We would be showing it as an investment. There would be assets that the government has. But we don't want to do that because a certain party says we shouldn't do that because it would lower the deficit and show us a balance sheet. The government with assets. Oh my goodness, what an idea. New Zealand tried that. New Zealand tried it. And it actually works quite well. If the public saw that the government debt was actually buying investments that they get benefit from down the road, just like a company has a balance sheet that they get benefit from down the road, they may be a little more supportive of some of these things, but we don't want that. That's part of the program. I love this one. Looks kind of a bit like a collapse. This is net exports. And you'll notice when it starts, the bottom drops out, 1980-ish. If you're going to move your production abroad, because capital wants to move, and you're going to build factories in China so that we can build the Chinese middle class or whatever we want to do, but American public is not suddenly going to stop buying that stuff. Now we import it. We don't make it ourselves. That's the consequence. So this is a direct consequence of that particular aspect of the policy. It's pretty dramatic. I'm very proud of this. It looks like a cliff. If we were doing a geology class, you'd probably be talking about a cliff here. There's no point to dwell on it. You know this stuff, right? It's pretty dramatic. The other part of this is interesting. We've now, the United States is now in this big sort of tug of war with China. But you can see that the United States business has built China, largely. There's a tremendous amount of capital has flowed in there, right? So we dug a hole, and now we've got to get out of it. But who benefited from that hole that was dug in the first place? You know, it's because we all get cheaper products. That's the party line, don't forget. We get cheaper products, and that's true. That's a true statement. That's why it's a good thing if you want to be able to pay for it. Interest rates, this is the Fed funds rate. With an economy slowing down, you have to put your foot on the gas now and again. And the only people that are trying to do that are the Fed. As you can see, it's successively meant that they had to push. If, you know, it's like it's getting slower, push harder. It's getting slower, push harder. There's no fiscal policy in this country. There's no organized anything other than that. We only have a one-lung policy. And it got us there. The flip at the end, see this little flip? This is the latest round up. People are saying, oh, the Fed is destabilizing the banking system. But look at that great big mountain at the beginning. That was Volcker, right? How many banks collapsed there? Not many. How many banks collapsed here? A few. And what's the difference between these 2 points? Not interest rates. Deregulation, okay? That's the difference. There are consequences to what you do. Banks, when they're regulated, can manage through great gyrations of interest rates much more easily than when they're deregulated. It's just a fact of life. I'm pointing it out to you. I mean, take it for what you want. This is the profits of financial corporations, just to show you they did really, really well from low interest rates. In 1975, the blue line. It's somewhere in the region of 15% of all. This is the all corporate profits of all sizes in the United States. Finance was about 15%. At its peak, it was about 40%. That's astonishing. The banking industry that actually doesn't do anything other than move money around, doesn't build anything, doesn't construct a damn thing, doesn't, right? 40% of all profits in the country? That's an astonishing takeover. It's really a weird turn of events. But we did get people off welfare. This was a great success. This is temporary assistance for needy families. This is the one that we've been talking about where you have to work to get it. Okay, this is the one. You can notice the timing of this is the average number of people collecting it each month. Notice the timing of the drop. Who is the person that did this? Bill Clinton? Giving you a clue. All right? So we managed to drive them off this. That was terrific. And everybody feels accomplished. We got them out of the way. It turns out that a lot of the people collecting this were single mothers. And as a consequence, this is what I was talking about this morning, Betty, if you remember. I mean, it's like, as a consequence, they had a choice. You're telling me to work to collect this, but I can't work because I got a kid, and this country has no child care system. It's worth a lick, so I can't do both. So I'm going to make a choice. And a lot of them made the choice not to collect the welfare. We increased child poverty very successfully using this. Well done us. But the original aim, getting them off, was a good one. And it worked, as you can see. The red line here is food stamps. Okay? I thought that's an interesting welfare program to put in front of you. I thought also the blue line would be an interesting welfare program to put in front of you. That is the money that one of those tax expenditures. Who gets that? It's a welfare program. People who have capital income don't pay tax at the same rate as people who get labor income. That's the cost of it per year. It's going up, not down. Is there a work requirement for this? I wonder. Is there a work requirement to collect the mortgage interest deduction you get for that? No, of course not. That's a good thing. Only welfare programs where we write checks are bad things. Remember that. It's only when we hide it in the tax code, the welfare checks. I've often said, and I made this, didn't go very far, obviously, to a person who is now in the Treasury Department. I said, listen, why don't we just abolish all this nonsense and just calculate how much you get each month and send everyone a check. Your mortgage interest deduction is worth $1,000 a month or $50 a month or whatever it is. We'll send you a check. Now you know you're on welfare. You're getting a government program. That would change the attitude of a lot of people, I suspect. But that's why it never gets anywhere, so whatever. We did well holding the federal minimum wage down because we don't want to hurt profits. Well done. The adjusted for inflation is basically, if you take your minimum wage, you're a little worse off than you were in 1968. No wonder people aren't happy. Household debt has been driven up. If you want people to have a nice standard of living and they are holding the wages down, they tend to borrow. Savings rate goes down. This is not a good thing. As you can see, a lot of these charts are pretty depressing. I actually extended it so that you could see the impact of the stuff that came out in the pandemic. Huge increase in savings. Everyone's talking about how that's fueled inflation. It's dropped like a stone. There's not much more gas left in that particular thing, as you can see. Government debt. Government debt. This is debt held by the public expressed as a percentage of GDP, which is the way we should always look at it. Don't look at it in aggregate terms. Look at it as a percentage of GDP because that's how you actually manage it. That's the effect it has. It's gone up from, what, 33% of GDP back at the beginning to 130-ish. That's an astonishing rise in debt. Well done. Tax cut Reagan. Tax cut Bush. That's the Obama response to bailing out the banks. Tax cut there too. And then we have a little crisis. We've lost control of this. As a country, it's out of control. Sooner or later, we're going to have to do it. But remember that big red bar I showed you. All those loopholes? Get rid of those loopholes. This goes away. Funny that. It never enters into the conversation in Washington. We're going to have to cut that, cut this, cut that. But those tax loopholes, get rid of them. Never going to happen, of course, because the politics are absurd. But this would go away. There's tremendous capacity in the economy for dealing with the debt if you make the right political choices. But we don't want to do that. I did this because Steve Sinding wanted me to. I honestly didn't intend to do this. Okay? This is the amount of debt added during a presidential campaign, life. 8 years, 2 years, whatever it was, doesn't matter. So, pretty goody two-shoes at the beginning there. If I had done this in the same way I did before, by the way, expressing it as a percentage of GDP, Truman would be going, the bar would be going down because the economy boomed and he only had a little growth in debt. The culprits are pretty obvious, I think. Okay? The culprits are pretty obvious. And that's where our accumulation starts, back in the middle of that chart. This is total market debt. The United States is addicted to debt. This is all debt. Government debt, household debt, corporate debt. And I'm comparing it to GDP. They were very close to each other way back in the good old days. Now we run an economy based on debt. Again, I'm sorry guys, I was trying to find good charts. Oh, this is a really good chart. This is the labor share. This is the percentage of national wealth, GDP, that goes to labor. You know, how much do people earn? Steady decline. That was part of the plan. Part of the plan. We're increasing profits, don't forget. Because, there you go, profits. The beginning of this chart I put on there because that decline is what was worrying people like the Powell when he's writing the Powell memorandum. Oh my goodness, profits are going down, we got to do something. So that's why I put the 47 through 70 bit on this chart. They were really successful with this plan. It was a brilliant plan. Oh, this is takes a little more explanation. Relative incomes. By that I mean that if, let's say, Betty earned 5% of GDP in 1980, and 5% in 1990, and 5% in 2000. This would be a straight line across the page, because it would be 1, right? I'm dividing. So the fact that it's declining means that Betty's share of GDP, no matter what her wages, is going down. So that's what I'm comparing here is household median household incomes. As a share of GDP, it's going down. Somebody else is getting money, the average person isn't. That's what this chart is saying. The next one, I did the same thing just to check myself. This was wages. The first one was household income. This is wages. Same thing. Somebody else is getting the money. This is why they're getting the money. We are told, this comes back all the way to the beginning, innovation doesn't always flow through. All right? Innovation shows up as productivity, productivity shows up as growth, growth shows up as higher wages. That's what we're taught. No. Disconnected. If someone is stopping the money flowing through to wages, we are creating wealth more and more. We're doing that's what the blue line says. Productivity is going up, but somebody else is getting the money. I just thought we would put this in just to clarify conversations. This shows the comparative increase in changing things. Wages at the bottom. No wonder people can't afford things, right? This is all indexed. Sorry, I should have told you. It's indexed. So 1974 equals 100. Okay? So there's been almost a 3,500, or just over 3,000% increase in healthcare costs since then. No wonder healthcare is the #1, by a long shot, causation of bankruptcy in the United States. Personal bankruptcy, healthcare. They go together. By a long shot. In fact, my understanding is that if you go to collection agencies, add up all the money that collection agencies are collecting from individual households in credit cards, mortgages, and so on, that does not equal the amount that they're collecting from healthcare debt. Healthcare debt is astonishingly important in the collection industry. There you go, it's a little pitch you didn't know. This is a little awkward. Each color is a different decade, right? Bars going up are good, bars going down are not. The purpose of showing you this one is, and I've got non-college and college. So you've got low-paying jobs, middle-paying jobs, high-paying jobs. I hope you can see quickly from this that we've lost a lot of middle-paying jobs. That's the effect of deindustrialization, the elimination of blue-collar jobs. A knock-on effect of that is, of course, that we've lost that escalator of opportunity. If you start at a lower end, we've lost middle-wage jobs for someone to move up to. So we've bifurcated our workforce. This is the same thing. This is a private conversation I had with Auteur. What he does is he does lower skill to higher skill, right? Which is a different way of looking at the same thing. We've lost medium skill, semi-skilled jobs. We've added low-skilled jobs. We've added high-skilled jobs, but we've lost the medium-skilled jobs. Oh, let me not talk about that. You would like this to be a straight line too. The mean and the median should be the same. Well, they should have a steady relationship, but it's been out of whack. Something's going on, and they would say there's a tail effect somewhere. The Gini coefficient went through the roof. We're very unequal. For those of you who've studied geopolitical theory, Rousseau, Tocqueville, and goodness knows who else say you cannot sustain a democracy with income inequality. You can't do it. People get ticked off. I'm not sure Rousseau would have said it like that, but he would have said it in elegant French. But that's the principle. You can't sustain democracy with radical income inequality. Doesn't work. This is the middle class. I took this shamelessly from Pew Research. The gray is the middle class. They define as anyone getting between 67% and 200% of the median wage. Shrunk during time, and you can see the bottom's going up. We're bifurcating. The middle guys are getting squeezed. This is a chart that I think will interest you. Higher up, good, social mobility. Further across, bad, more inequality. Got it? Higher up, good. Further across, bad. There you go. In the wrong place. It is neither socially mobile nor equal. It's a really bad place to be. We've done away with a lot of social mobility that people think. By social mobility, I'm using the sociological definition of that. If I can predict your income by looking at your parents' income, that means you're stuck, right? You're earning roughly the same as your parents. You're stuck socially. You're not moving up. So we would like to see your income not predictable by your parents' income. Who does well? The usual suspects. Who does badly? Also the usual suspects. The UK, US, all the ones that went all in on this neoliberal stuff. It's really kind of interesting. Oh, let's not look at that. Here we go. This is a fun one. All right. What I did was took the distribution of income by quintile. 25, 50% there, 75%. So this is where you fit. 90%, and I thought we'd better look at 95, 90, and the top 1%, simply because it can get a little nutty, right? So this is distribution of income. This is what it looked like in 1975, okay? This is what it looked like in 1979. Not much different, we're doing well. This is what it looked like in 1989. There's a tail development, right? Those folks who put all this stuff in place are beginning to reap the rewards of putting this stuff in place. The bankers, the corporate lawyers, all those kinds of people that live off the fat. They're doing well. I'm sorry. I'm teasing. Okay. Whoa! 2000. Things changed. That was the go-go years of bank deregulation, hedge funds, all sorts of good stuff going on. Whoa! 2007. I feel really bad here because there was a change, obviously, for the top of the house. Something went wrong for some people in the top 5%. I feel really bad. Then I thought it would be really cool if I recalculated that last purpley line as if it was distributed by the 1975 line. That's what it would look like. Black line. People still doing really well at the top of the house. Look at the difference in income. If I'm at the bottom, if I'm in the bottom 25%, I'd be getting $28,000 a year more. Now, those people are earning about $30,000 a year. I'm almost doubling their income. And I don't have to do any government redistribution. I just have to keep wages where they should have been in relation to work, right throughout. Okay? Same with the 50%. The average household gets $70,000 a year. That's the average household. Under this, they would be getting $42,000 more. Now, imagine that translating, I put my economics hat on. Those people would likely spend that. They would spend it on goods and services. People would have jobs. The economy would be going nicely, thank you very much. By concentrating wealth at the top, you slow the economy down. Because they don't spend it. You see, when I get animated, stuff starts to go. But this is without any government program. If corporations had just stayed the course, this is not a government program. If we had just paid people the way we were paying them relatively in 1975, middle-income people would be earning $120,000 a year, not $70,000. That's huge. That's huge. And that doesn't need redistribution policies or anything. That's just sensible stuff. And that would boost the economy. We would be growing not at 2%, but at 3.5%. It just is basic stuff. But apparently not. Okay. So here we go. Do you remember that list at the beginning? Let me take a look. We increased inequality, we slowed growth, and we increased debt. Well done. Here we corrupted politics because we pumped a lot of money in. We slowed growth too, and we increased financial stability. Well done. These policies have really been successful. We suppressed wages, we increased inequality, we undermined opportunity, according to that chart I just showed you, right? Here we go. We encourage cronyism because, if you want to make a lot of money, you don't stay in government, you work in government and go work for Lockheed after you've done in government. And then you go to be a lobbyist. So cronyism, we've created that whole thing. It's good stuff. We don't need research. We'll let other people do that. The Chinese are good at it. And we've increased financial insecurity. I wish I could report something else, but I can't. So who won? Well, I mean, this is the point. I do want to say this and be honest about this. If these kinds of things I talked about right at the very beginning could have been put in place, you know, it's a utopia. I mean, utopias don't work. But if it could have been put in place, maybe it would have worked nicely. But it was never followed through on. We never followed through on increasing competition. We never followed through on lowering corporate power. And we never followed through on lowering inequality, all of which Walter Lippmann talks about in his book that was discussed in 1938. Okay? So, right? All of those would have been on the list of neoliberalism had we done 1938 style neoliberalism, right? Or we didn't prevent social, we got rid of it. So, it's like, okay, what was this done for? It was to liberate the elite from the New Deal. It was a power play. Simple. We all talk about the loss of democracy as if it's Trump. It's not, they didn't do Trump. That went a long time ago when the corporations took over. Get used to it, okay? Which, you know, this was God. It worked. Well done. Except the recession kind of blew it up and took away the credibility of some of those plans. And we're now in, okay, what do we do? He's not a neoliberal. He's not a neoliberal at all. In any way, shape, or form. And nor is this guy. Right? We're struggling to find new policies because we know that it doesn't work. And we don't know the answer. Don't ask me what the answer is. But I did dig out this speech, because nobody knows. That's the point. I did dig out this speech, and it's a very well-known politician. You will know exactly who it is. In this speech, he says, we've got to free ourselves from the neoliberal malaise, right? He says, we've got to put Wall Street in their place. We've got to bring critical industries back to America. And we've got to resurrect an obligation to build America's workforce. Tick, 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 tick. Who was that? Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio said that. Okay? This is where the Republican Party is. Josh Hawley gave a speech. Josh Hawley, you know Josh? He's my friend Josh. Well-educated, really, really interesting person if he could just get out of his own way, which he can't, so there you go. Useless statement on my part, I take it back. He gave a speech 6 months ago, almost identical. The bright young things in the Republican Party have abandoned neoliberalism. I did it again, leave it on the floor. Do you see what I'm saying? They're talking about this. This is straight out of the New Deal. It's really weird how the cycle is going. Really weird. So when I say I don't know where we're going, it's because I'm reading this and saying, whoa, do you really mean this? I'm looking for the fine print. You know, it's like, what are you adding in here? Are you trying to fool me? But that's where we're headed. It's really quite an interesting time. Oh, don't look at that. I'll send it to you. That chart, listen, this guy, William Domhoff, Who Rules America. It's a wonderful book. If you haven't read that book, it's tough going. He's a psychologist / sociologist, a bit of both. He describes how the corporate rich funnel money into various places, and it comes out the bottom in congressional committees and in the executive branch. And you can follow it. I mean, we will do it. Look, major corporations pay their folks a lot of money, right? They are the corporate rich. They're connected. They become trustees of foundations. Foundations like Rockefeller, they start funneling money and ideas to think tanks. Think tanks start giving. This is how the country's run, guys. It's not run in elections. This is how it's run. There's a group of people. There's the universities, MIT, Harvard, blah blah blah, right? The Business Roundtable, Council on Foreign Relations, blah 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 blah. This is how the country's run, according to Bill Domhoff. And it's got a lot of truth to it when you actually look at it. You all think you vote for policies. No, you don't. Those experts from MIT go and have they're called into a select committee. They give their august presentation. That august presentation impresses some congressperson who's never heard of this. And they say, well, why don't you do it? And they say, well, I'll write you some legislation. And they write the legislation, and there is. I have written legislation. I know how that works, right? You don't really, you can blame me for credit card stuff. There you go. Who follows the illusion? What comes next? I don't know. Chaos? Chaos? We could have a battle over, I think we're kind of in this one. We've got a battle over distribution again. I'm put in the Turchin thing. Please read. This is I'm shilling for poor Peter Turchin's book. That's a great book. Please read it. We could go back to Brandeis. There's a name from the past for you guys who are into your law stuff, right? We could go back to that. He said, you know, corporations have more of a social purpose. That was his real thing, right? We could continue where we are, but I think the decline would continue. We can go back to something like social democracy, American style, which is kind of scarily where Rubio looked like he was going, which is kind of upsets me. It's kind of weird, I don't know. It's disorienting, let me put it. Or we could just have a populist uprising and slide into authoritarianism. The one thing we do know is that it's going to be chaos. Whatever happens is going to mean that we have to deal with this corporate wealthy people. They have to share. And as I said repeatedly, rich people don't like sharing. So it's a fight, right? It's going to be a fight. If you want a democracy, it's going to have to be a fight over who gets what. This is a long quote, and I really wanted to separate, but this is from Gillens and Page. They did this study in 2014, elites, interest groups, and average citizens. What they did was they took major legislation in Congress from 1980 through 2014, and they scored it. They said, who benefits from this? Do corporations benefit from it? Do trade unions benefit from it? Does the middle class benefit from it? Whatever. They did a lot of slicing and dicing. They came up, and I'm making up numbers because I forget the precise ones, but about 1,800 such pieces of legislation. Of the 1,800, about 1,600 benefited corporations. The government of this country is not on behalf of the average person, which is why the average person says the system's rigged. It is. That is a very accurate statement on the part of the folks who are trying to tear things down. The system's rigged. And as he said, this is very elegant. Despite the seemingly strong empirical support, it's like, oh my goodness, could you get out of your way? These are academics talking, right? Please. Then it gets down. Americans do enjoy some features central to democratic governance. I like the way they concede this, like, you know, regular elections, freedom of speech. This is the punch. But we believe that if policy making is dominated by powerful business organizations and smaller, then America's claim to be a democratic system is seriously threatened. Yes, that's my point. We had a power play in the 1970s and 80s. It worked. It worked big time. And we've been running the country on behalf of a small number of people ever since. And all these elections don't really matter. Wise words from the past. I always like ending with a couple of quotes. Ill fares the land, hastening ill to prey, where wealth accumulates and men decay. Oliver Goldsmith, 1770. He was really upset at the Industrial Revolution, thought the wealth was being generated, but wasn't being shared. Don't forget, when the Industrial Revolution kicked on in Britain, the average lifestyle collapsed. People got shorter, sicker. If you look at the average height of an English person in 1850 and compare it to 1750, they'd gone down a couple of inches. It was enormous. Bad diet, bad everything. Industrial Revolution did not help the average person. But it made a lot of people wealthy, hence this. There's another one. I threw this on to be more ecumenical. Hudson, of course, is a communist, so I thought we'd dig out something really provocative. Because it ends, much water will flow by a long night of chaos and desolation will pass. That's where we are. We're in the desolation part. We have no idea. And we have no idea. We're lost in the wilderness at the moment, and we need to figure it out. Oh, but I do have one last chart. This is one of my favorites. I saved it to the end. This is the one I was describing Betty this morning when we were talking about. This is political polarization going back to 1878. Lower is less polarization, higher is more polarization. Okay? Big U. And look where it is at least. Right in the New Deal. What a shocker. Why? Because society was fairer. People knew it. We had less controversial politics. Then after we go into the neoliberal area, poof, back it goes up. But there's a third line. It's a ghost. See it? I tried to ghost it out, but there's the third line. Do you know what that is? It follows exactly the same course. And I'm not necessarily saying it has something to do with the other ones, but I'm kind of suggesting it might, right? It's top 5% incomes. As top 5% of the comes down as a share of total incomes, polarization comes down. When it starts to go back up, polarization goes back up. Now, I'm not necessarily saying causation, but boy, there's an association. Boy, is there an association. When you have an unequal society, people don't think it's fair. Politics gets ugly. And I suggest that we need to remember that. Last one. No theory, no promises, no morality, no amount of goodwill, no relation. Only power restrains power. That was said by James Burnham. You don't know who James Burnham is. You don't need to know who James Burnham is. James Burnham, this is the book. He wrote another book in 1941. It's called The Managerial Revolution. George Orwell panned it in a wonderful review. It's one of the best pieces of writing by George Orwell. It's a brilliant review, but he got it all wrong. James Burnham's point, and this is back in the 1940s, don't forget, we're worried about socialism, we're worried about the contest with Marxism and so forth. James Burnham is saying, capitalism is not going to get replaced by socialism. All of you socialists have got that totally wrong. Right? That's what he says. It's going to be replaced by corporatism. The corporate elite will take over and run the country as a plutocracy. That's what he wrote in that book in 1941. And he was dead right. He was dead right. That's the way we've run the country since the New Deal was tossed out. That's it, guys.